you see, it appears that, activist Amanda Seales was on Don Lemon's show. And I guess she took this as an opportunity to try to school him about what the Democratic Party is really doing. Now, Amanda Seales, I know some people have different opinions of her. I'm not going to get into the entertainment part with Issa Rae. I'm not getting into all that for this particular conversation, but I do want to focus on what she said here politically. So shout out to Case Study QB for this clip here. Here's Don Lemon and Amanda Seales. It's interesting because she is basically going to tell Don Lemon to his face about what corporate media really does. Listen to this.
You were on cable news. They rarely show what's going on in the world. Rarely. Especially when it has to do with resistance. Because cable news and mainstream media is here for the purpose of suppressing resistance. They're not trying to incite the people. They are tools of the propaganda machine. So the effort to show that and encourage people is not going to be utilized on those airwaves. That's why there's such a egregious effort to silence, social media in that way. However,
isn't that interesting that she's saying this to Don Lemon's face, and Don Lemon kind of looks to the side here a little bit because she's basically telling him about a network like what he was a part of. So she's saying you were a part of a propaganda outlet, which is true. He was. I mean, what do you say to that? At least she said it to his face. To his face. And the look, he just looks down like, ugh.
When you look at France, they didn't even change the pension. They just talked about it. They didn't even take away pension. They were just like, hey, we might do this. And France was like, oh, hell no. We burning cars. In Grenada, the same person was in power for quite some time. And then he got a little too comfy and tried to do the same thing with pensions. And Grenadians was like, whoa. Get him out of there. Get him out of there immediately. And that was that. It wasn't even like a confusion. It was just, finished, party done. So
do you guys understand what Amanda is saying? What Amanda is saying is that I guess she doesn't understand why in the US people are less willing to get out in the streets by like the millions and say F you to the government, F you to, corporate media, to the establishment. Meanwhile, when you look at countries like France and you look at countries like, she mentioned Grenada, I think she's part Grenadian. These people have no problem doing that. I covered the France protest. I think it was like 2 years ago now when that happened. Yeah, they were not letting up. They're like, no, you're not going to increase our retirement age. So where is that energy here in the US? Where is that resilience, right? So we see some of that obviously during the pro-Palestinian protests. We saw some of that during the George Floyd protests. But what I noticed is that when it comes to economic issues, we don't see that, right? I mean, I look back on it and I think back during the pandemic and all these lockdowns were happening at that point in time. And it's kind of wild and bizarre to me that, like, for the most part, a lot of people just sat back and took it for the most part. And I'm kind of surprised. And I feel like like in some of the other countries, they didn't treat it that way. In some of the other countries, they were like, we're giving you checks every month, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to give you one stimulus or 2-time stimulus. We're going to give you a check every month. And you guys don't have to worry about going to work. You can stay at home, take care of yourself and your fam. That's what New Zealand did. So I think it's mind boggling to me too. Like how people we are not getting out in the streets for the economic issues. And that brings it back to demands and 11 demands. I think it is amazing and it's great that we got out into the streets for Gaza. I think it's amazing and it's great that we got out into the streets for George Floyd. But why aren't we getting into the streets to have a mass movement for economics? And that's the question people need to really start asking. Start tapping your friend on the shoulder and ask them, why aren't we having a movement in this country for economics? I don't know. Because all these different organizations, you see, you have an Answer Coalition, Answer Coalition puts on a lot of events and they have buses that pick up people from these locations and take them all to DC to protest. And that is great and amazing. I don't see Answer Coalition doing that for economics. So what's really happening, folks? Where is that same push when all these people lost their jobs? Look back at the '08 housing crisis. Like, where is the same push and energy for all these people to get out in the streets for economics? We have to have that conversation, because you see, they do that in France and they did that in Grenada.
I say all of that to say that Americans have been tricked into thinking they're comfortable. And this is done by small incrementations over time that we don't argue enough about, right? When they, like, we talk about how when they took your rights for Roe v. Wade, that's when everything should have been just handled. And I'm being careful with my language for obvious reasons. But that is when we as people needed to demonstrate in a way that did not leave confusion about our frustration. You know, you were on.
So that's a really good point there that Amanda brought up. And I know some people in the chat were saying that, you know, we had to work and stuff. Totally get that. Totally get it. But we were also working during the pro-Palestinian protests. And those protests went on for over a year. And some people are still protesting. They're not as large as they were, but those protests went on for over a year. I think what Amanda says here is true, that we have been convinced, we've been tricked into thinking that we're comfortable when we're actually not. Not all of you watching me, of course, but I'm just saying, like, the majority of Americans, I think, have been conditioned to believe that they're okay, economically okay. And that brings up this point here about the Democratic Party, because again, why don't they fight, right? Listen to what she says to Dawn about this.
One of the issues with Democrats is that, just like Republicans, many of them are very much married to corporate dollars as well as AIPAC.
Okay.
So unless you are truly disconnecting from that, you can't really remodel what the function of the party is, because it's still controlled by the same levers, even if the intentions of the representatives are different. Am I making sense?
Yeah, because they're still operating within the same system that, right? That sort of
it's bigger. It's like the good apple cops. You know, it's like you come in there with a good heart, but it's bigger than you.
That part right there. This is why I don't believe that the Democratic Party can be reformed. And once upon a time, I did believe that. And then I think we saw how all that played out since 2016, right? What Amanda just said, it's bigger than you. So two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that there are people who really do want to try to reform the party and believe that if they just keep trying, it can happen. But at the same time, it can also be true that the party is not going to allow that to happen. So you're basically just butting heads. You're like, here, right? So what do you do then? This is why I've continued to say, instead of people are wasting their time by trying to fight inside of a corporate establishment party, those people should just coalesce and have a separate party. I've shown you guys all the different countries that have so many different parties. And yet so many people here just become, I don't know, they just become able to accept, oh, well, it's two parties that kind of run the show, so just leave it how it is. But the people who really want to so-called reform that party, those people are part of the problem. And I didn't understand that in 2016. I didn't understand that in 2018 when Justice Democrats was coming. I didn't understand that at that point. I thought that was the right way to go. But they're part of the problem because they're helping maintain the status quo, because they're working with the party that is status quo and that is taking the corporate money. To Amanda's point, as much as people like Jasmine Crockett and everybody now wants to point out about the big money, the billionaire money on the Republican side, to Amanda's credit, you really ain't got room to talk when you in the Democratic Party and you got billionaire money on your side. And I warned you guys coming into 2025 that the Democratic Party was going to go with this narrative that billionaire money is controlling the Republican Party, as if these mofos do not have billionaire money controlling the Democratic Party as well. I told you. And what do you see happening? So I think Amanda is correct about that.
It's bigger than you. And so how do you shift that? And that requires grand actions. And we have yet to be able to see that with Democrats, because there is an individualism among Democrats that really is reflective of this colonial empire that we're in. But that's part of why there's still establishment.
So
unless you get a party that's either not called Democrats, or you get Democrats who are like, there's enough of us to say, we not y'all no more. We not y'all no more.
So does everybody get that? And that's the thing. So what did the Democratic Party do? They became more clever. After Justice Democrats were able to get into that party, again, these people were not supposed to win. They were not supposed to beat people like Elliot Engel and Joe Crowley, who've been there for years and just take a lot of corporate money. So what the Democratic Party did is that, oh, we see what's happening here. You guys think that you're going to come in and you're going to change things. So they became smarter and they became proactive to prevent that from happening again. That's why you don't hear much about Justice Democrats anymore. And then Justice Democrats started to lose money. Now I hear they're asking for money again. Of course, because Trump's in office. During Biden and Kamala, they said they ain't had no money. They ain't run no candidates. Now all of a sudden they want some money. And they're like, let's run some people. So you see what that's really all about. So to that point, if the Democratic Party, Democrat leadership, and the donor class peep the game, and they found a way to prevent that from happening again. So had this been round 2 or whatever, AOC and them would have never got in. Had they been prepared, AOC and them would have never gotten in. I told you before, the Democratic Party tends to be reactive instead of proactive. So their response to the Justice Democrats winning in Congress, winning those congressional seats, was to make sure that others wouldn't get in, and also to make sure some of them would lose their seats. So I would say the options that Amanda presented, you would have to go with the former, which is to start a whole different party.
Which I don't think is realistic. I was going to say, like, it's not just AIPAC. It's lobbyists. It's, right. So it's not just AIPAC, right? It's big pharma.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
Well,
I just want to clarify so people can
go ahead. Do your thing. Go ahead.
No, so like big pharma, big oil. Like insurance. Like they're like what's happening right now is so many Americans are learning the ways in which what they thought government was, it is not, right? And so one of those things is the very 1+1 way that corporations affect government in corrupt ways. And one of those ways is they donate, and then there's a quid pro quo.
There it is. Yeah, because the whole Elon thing is making more people see, whoa, you mean to tell me someone who's not actually a politician can just walk in there and do that stuff? And here's a perfect example of this. And I don't know if people saw this, but to Amanda's point, listen to this. Shout out to Case Study. Stephen A. Smith is asking Hakeem Jeffries, how is he going to push back on the extreme left members of the party? See what I mean? They don't want you there. Listen.
Anybody worth their salt will tell you the extreme left had a lot to do with pulling y'all back from the momentum one would argue you had, obviously, in 2020. What about pushing back against your own party?
Well,
what momentum? Bernie Sanders had the most momentum in 2020. Right. So Stephen A. Smith, I want to point this out. Stephen A. Smith is, has been very critical of the Democratic Party, but I think people assume he's like some lefty. Stephen A. Smith is not a lefty. He's very clear about this. He's independent. He's a middle of the road kind of guy. He's not far left. He's not far right, etc. And I don't know if we want to use the far terms, but he's not going in that direction. He obviously is not even in agreement with the progressives or so-called progressives that are in Congress, which is probably why Hakeem Jeffries did this show. And if you have not watched it, please watch my expose on Hakeem Jeffries, who he is, where he came from, and how he got that congressional seat. It's on my channel. It's called Hakeem Jeffries Exposed. So check that out. Now listen to this.
An extreme left protest me more than they protest Donald Trump. Because literally, wherever I go. So I think in part because I've declined, I've refused, I've chosen not to bend the knee to either people on the far left and certainly not to Donald Trump and the far right.
He chose not to do that when he took that money from AIPAC and some of these other lobby interest groups that have put money into his pocket. That's when he made that decision. He's out here talking about he made these decisions on his own. The money that he took made those decisions for him.
All have a responsibility to serve the people we were elected to represent and the country and the Constitution. And I certainly have not been bashful and will not be bashful in disagreeing with people who are trying to take this country in a direction that doesn't lift everybody up, whether that comes from the right or whether that comes from the far left.
So he says this as, people not trying to lift everybody up, but the progressives wanted to lift everybody up, right? Isn't that why the whole idea of the universal policies, that's what that was about, was to lift everybody up. So he kind of tells on himself there. But to Amanda's point, you see what's happening here. That party is not going to change. And I think people are going to continue to spin these wheels and this strategy and keep telling you, oh, just get in there and fight. And they're going to fight for us and da-da-da. Some because they make money off of it. Some because they make money off of it. And some are going to do that because they want that to happen. But just because you want something to happen doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. So I think Amanda is correct on that point. And I think Don Lemon needed to hear that. Now, answer this question. Do you think that they would have had this conversation if Don Lemon was still hosting his show on CNN? You think Amanda Seales would have been able to come on and have this conversation with him and be just as frank as she wants to be? Think about that. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.